So hello everyone, welcome back to ED Susty Talk series live from ED23 in London for the 1st and 2nd of March. You've already heard from some of our speakers and some of our delegates about various aspects of corporate leadership, and that's what these Susty Talk interviews are all about. And I'd like to point out that these are sponsored by Persephone, who you heard from in one of the videos previously. You probably, watching back, heard that about a day or two ago. If you are keeping track of all these videos, well done. As I mentioned, ED23 is all about courageous business leadership. So what better people to have on the Susty Talk sofa than two organisations that are truly focused on kind of capturing that corporate leadership and the change that it can bring. So it's my pleasure to say we're joined by Ben Kellard, who is the Director of Business Strategy for the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership, which I will just refer to as CISL from now on because it's a little bit easier to say, and Helle Jorgensen, who's the founder of Competent Boards. So thank you both for joining me today. But Helle, I'd love to start with you and a bit about Competent Boards, and a good chance for you to explain what it is that they do. But in your words, how would you define a competent board in terms of corporate sustainability?
I think it's someone who have the insight, they have the foresight to provide oversight. That's been the same for a long, long time. But nowadays, you need to understand sustainability, you need to understand climate, you need to understand biodiversity, you need to understand all of the risks, but also the opportunities that come there. Unfortunately, at the moment, we have about 5% of the directors of the 100 largest companies in the world that are educated when it comes to sustainability, climate change, biodiversity, etc. So 4.5 years ago, we set up Competent Boards with the support of Paul Pullman, who will be here tomorrow, I think, with a lot of other both chairs and business leaders to say, how do we ensure that those board directors have the insight, have the foresight to provide the oversight that they need to do. So a Competent Boards is someone who can ask the questions, but also have an idea of what should be the answers, and therefore can actually bring us to the world we want. And one of the things that I've said that is like, we started the future boardroom because I want to make sure that we get to that future boardroom by choice instead of by chance. And I think that goes with everything we are talking about here, and also what you're doing.
Yeah,
we're doing together.
And that's a great point to bring Ben in on. And Ben, we're long time friends with CISL. We've seen you at our events in the past, but it's all good having a competent board. But I think a lot of our audience, our sustainability professionals, perhaps feel they don't necessarily have that level of involvement or buy-in from the board just yet. So I'd love to get your view on what advice you'd give to a sustainability professional that feels that perhaps they're still knocking at the door of the board, and how they can start to get businesses to view this as a real strategic aspect of what they do.
Yeah, sure. So we're collaborating with Helle and others, doing a lot of work around the role and nature of boards. And what we're finding and a lot of the work we do is coming into boards and helping them raise the awareness of these big global trends and the implications for the business. Because, but I think if you're a sustainability professional, that often I think it's about finding what's the pressure point, what's the way in? So what's the sort of the key burning platform at the moment that you may want to have that as an entry point into, whether it's a board subcommittee, or the other option is, I think, connecting with individual board members as well. So who've maybe got a particular oversight, maybe they've got a particular background, and that might be around, for example, changing environmental regulation or executive pay or whatever the pain point is for that industry. Because then it's about, I think, often using data to help them raise awareness of these issues. But I think often the couple of things that are missing is, first of all, is helping to connect the dots. And that's a lot of the work we're doing, which is not just taking about what's this fire that's burning, how do we put that fire out? But actually, these are all systemic issues around our business model, because so many businesses are reliant on pushing externalities onto society. And they are creating liabilities for the business, which society can no longer bear. And I think, so it's about connecting those dots up and understanding that, but I think through those pain points, through the entry points. And often I think the bit that's missing is, what are these trends and how is it impacting for the overall business system we're a part of? So not just looking at the narrow boundary of the business, who do we buy and sell from, but what's the wider value network we operate within, and how are these trends impacting that? And often that, I think, is the real unlock for boards of directors who have got that more longer term oversight. That often, I think, can be the unlock.
Yeah, that wider network you mentioned is key. And Helle, I'd like to bring you on this point, is that ESG in general and the terminology around that evolved. I remember it used to be CSR, ESG was just finance speak, and now they've converged. But is so broad in terms of what boards need to look out for. But also the external pressures being applied on businesses has really ratcheted up. It's no longer just the kind of the NGOs. It's now the financial authorities around greenwash. It's the customers. We heard from Michaela Loach, the climate activist, and that movement has really kind of driven new kind of pressures on boards and businesses in that sense. You've got internal pressures from employees who want to work for sustainable businesses. You've got all of this kind of scrutiny and regulation coming around. It can be hard for businesses just to kind of keep their heads above the water with everything that's going on. How do they, I suppose, not just survive sustainability, but actually thrive and become a kind of force for good? Because that's a completely different transformation.
That's the transformation that we're trying to create, both with existing board members, but also the board members of the future. And yes, they're hitting the shoulders of these board directors 24/7, right? All of these different things. You need to have the purpose, not only of the business, and a solid purpose, not just a fluffy thing, but you also need to ensure that you understand what's the purpose of the board. And you and I talked about the book I wrote, Stewards of the Future, right? I believe that we as board directors, we have a role as stewards and stewards of the future. And I think that's not only the existing boards, and when we have business leaders that go through the competent boards programs and the board directors at the same time, that's where suddenly they say, oh, now we know the questions. We have the confidence, we have the courage, and we can ask those broader questions that are going to be important for getting this business to the next level, to that transition, instead of just saying, oh, what's going to happen tomorrow? So we talk geopolitical issues, we talk dilemmas, we talk human rights, we talk tax, investment, pay, all of those different areas are important to have that integrated mindset. And I think that's where you really need, and that, again, I mean, that's that integrated mindset, understanding what are the pressure points, not only today, but also in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years. And who will be our customers at that point? Who will be our employees at that point? Who will be those that are investing in our companies? Who will be those that are financing our company? Because if we only look at it for today, we're going to not be ready for that tomorrow. So lots of very exciting time.
No, it's good. And you mentioned that kind of purpose and how it can be a little bit fluffy sometimes for corporates. And Ben, I'd love to bring you on this because, you know, I'm a journalist and I write features about business purpose sometimes. They say a picture, paints 1,000 words, but sometimes with a business purpose, when I'm searching for an image for that, it's hard to define purpose for a lot of organizations. And it can just be a bit of a slogan on an email or a wall sometimes. So what does kind of true business purpose through the lens of kind of corporate sustainability look like for you?
Yeah, so I've been spending a number of years actually working with practitioners to really try and unpack that, because I think there's been a lot talked about corporate purpose and a lot talked about sustainability, but not bringing the two together. And so I think failure to do that is a risk of putting old wine in new bottles, not necessarily with any great grandeurs, but through not knowing any different. So I think from our work, and it's most recently culminated in the first ever British standard for a sustainable purpose-led organisation called PAS 808, and it's a principle-based standard. And what we found there is that, and from the work we've done, is that purpose-led organisations are really combining two things. First of all, they're really saying, what's the outside-in view on the business? So not just looking at the usual industry tracker and trends and what are our peers and our doing, but actually how are these big global trends impacting our geographies, our categories, our markets and so on. So really understanding the changing needs of society and the environmental limits they need to operate within. The second piece is that inside out. What are we really good at as a business? What's our core capabilities? What is our secret sauce that we're uniquely good at? And then bringing those two together, like a Venn diagram, starts to identify those purpose domains. Where can our unique contribution distinctively contribute to those changing needs in society? And that's the unlock. It's because I think from that flows future markets, future propositions, where the benefits are, and so on. That is the major unlock, and so that's what we kind of set out in the PAS, and also a lot of the culture and behaviours that need to sit underneath that. and because you're right, there's a lot of, I think, confusion over what that needs to look like. But I think they're the real core components, and that's what I look for in a purpose as well. And coming back to boards, what we're seeing in corporate governance codes is that it's the role of the board to ensure the purpose, and then that the strategy and culture is congruent with the delivery of that. And so I think this is a key element for boards to be able to understand the elements of good sustainable purpose, and then scrutinise the executive team to ensure that's aligned with the strategy and culture of the organisation.
No, absolutely, and we've got some coverage of that past standard on the ED website. So if people are watching, you can check that out on the ED website. A little plug just for that one.
And free to download as well.
Yes, exactly. So that's all good in that sense. And we've heard so far at ED23 about the kind of pressing challenges that we face, and it's not just kind of one. It's not just the climate crisis. It's the ecological crisis. It's a societal breakdown. It is the poly crisis, which is manifested one after the other in a kind of falling dominoes into a kind of perma crisis. There's always something that business and society are being pressed with and facing with. And Helle, we were talking before, and I'd like to ask both of you this actually, about how corporate sustainability has changed over the years, and as it becomes much more mainstream. But in this kind of real era of severe crisis to respond to, how is I suppose the corporate skill set of leadership changed compared to maybe pre-Paris Agreement, where maybe pessimistically I'm saying it was a little bit niche, and now there is a need to respond to it. What's leadership look like to you?
Well, I think if you go back, let's start going back and dating myself here, but it's 30 years ago that I did the first green account in the world, and the first integrated report came a little bit later. And then we started having supply chain issues back in '96. But that was also the time where we started saying, transparency, bribery, that was certainly I'm an accountant and a business lawyer, right? And I had a question in my exam: how much can you deduct in bribe? And you could, right? And now you would go like, whoa. So if we look at it, we actually coming, we are moving, not as fast as I want. As I said, there's only 5% of the largest 100 companies that are trained and have education when it comes to sustainability at those that serve on the board level. But I see so many going. We're in 50 countries now. Competent boards have now alumni and students in 50 countries, which means that there's a lot of there that are getting trained and therefore getting to the next level. And that's not just in one aspect. It's kind of like understanding, as you say, all of these different crises. And how does it interrelate? How do we get that mindset where we have to look at all of these dilemmas? And I mean, it was in Davos here in January where we talked about all of these dilemmas. And you look at the risk report. I think for a board of directors today can not only look at what are the risks that are facing us, or what are the risks that we are putting on society and the externalities, but you also need to look at the big picture and see how will climate change impact us? How will involuntary migration impact us? Are we part of the solution or are we part of the problem? Because you want to attract those customers, as I said before, of the future, the employees of the future, etc. Yeah. So you need to look into that.
And Ben, I suppose an evolution of that question is looking at the future, and if we can respond to these crises and if we can account for everything that Helle just said, what does corporate leadership look like closer down the line as we approach net zero? And if we can somehow get net zero on track, what does corporate leadership look like to you?
So I think what we've identified is almost three responses. If you take business as usual, which is the old paradigm of we just focus on financial value creation and assume that markets will deliver well-being outcomes and that the governments will create the rules of the game. That's the old way of thinking. Well, because of massive regulatory and market failures, that's not the case. So I think the first one is, if you like, short-term self-interest, which is CSR, which is where the core business is still about financial value at any cost, and anything happening in sustainability is peripheral, and it's more about mitigating risks. The second, I think, response is, if you like, more long-term self-interest, which is around still profit maximization, but into the medium term. If you like, enlightened shareholder value, which is where you then invested in your relationship with nature and society, the extent to which you can prove it protects your medium-term profits. But none of that will make a business resilient in the future. And so I think the final one, which we identify as really being fully purpose-driven, which is where the business goes through that process I described, where it fundamentally says, what are the needs of society? How do we as a business uniquely serve it in a profitable way if you're in the private sector? That then has a completely different view, and then you operate within parameters, we call it, which is, if you like, those environmental and social limits. So it moves beyond climate, and I think so often businesses are just getting their head around climate risk and net zero, but of course they need to be thinking holistically. We can't decouple that from nature, you can't decouple that from people, as we know, and as we saw coming out of Montreal at COP15, an explicit linking between climate and nature and people. So it's taking that holistic view, and that, I think, is then setting a business up to create that North Star to say, how can we proactively and confidently know that we're benefiting society, rather than apologetically protecting something which may or may not be benefiting society, either in its purpose or in how it delivers that purpose. So I think that's the shift we need to see, and we're seeing that progression, but often what passes as sustainability is really either that sort of short or medium term self-interest, and it's just not going to get businesses far enough in order to be successful and resilient, I believe.
And if I can, because that also gets to the innovation, right? We're talking a lot about the risk, but what about all of the innovation? What about the opportunities? I've been saying for many years that it's not about how you use your money, it's how you make your money, right? And I think we have somehow forgotten what is it that really, from a business point of view, how do we get that innovation? How do we be courageous? You have Maersk that went out and said, okay, we have a chicken and egg situation. We can't have, the big ships, the vessels, right? We don't have any green fuel. Well, then we should not build any of these big vessels shipping. And they said, well, let's be courageous. And they did it. And I think we're going to see much more of that coming up. And that means that companies that are thinking, well, let's see what's happening, will be disrupted. They are disrupted at the moment. So this is, it's actually, do you want to be part of that net positive future? And do you want to have that compass pointing to that, instead of saying, okay, let's wait and see what's going to happen? Because then I think you're going to wait for a very long time.
And it's critical, and I think that what that shift is, businesses are used to being a link in an established chain, right? So if you're a fast-moving consumer goods, you sit within a supply chain, you sell to retailers, and it's established. Often what are these opportunities, I think you're right, you point to, mean co-creating whole new, ways of delivering, value and products and services. It means co-creating them with others. But I think you're right. I mean, look at DSM. They identified as a science-based company. We can provide solutions for nutrition. We can provide, food supplements. We can provide net zero solutions. We can provide photovoltaics and so on. So all of that are huge growth areas. And I think you're right. That often gets overlooked because people are sort of mining existing, mature markets are already saturated, rather than looking for new open white space or green space, dare I say it.
No, you make great points, and we saw that with the pandemic. The amount of manufacturers are able to just pivot their production lines and what Nigel Topping was saying on the morning of day one so far about how some businesses are scared of exponential change when actually there's a chance to embrace it. But if this hasn't acted as a kind of call to action for you guys watching at home, then I don't know what will. But Helle, Ben, thank you so much. That's been really inspirational, and I think our audience is going to really take some key messages from that. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you.
Brilliant. And as per, yes, Susty Talk will be continuing across the 2 days here at ED23 in London. So be sure to look out for more conversations with more thought leaderships as we delve into those kind of big challenges through the lens, as we've successfully done today, of optimism as well. So be sure to look out for those. Thank you.